So welcome to this week's episode of Tree Lady Talks, in which Sharon interviews Catherine Nuttgens, the Urban Programme Lead for the Woodland Trust. She has a project management background connecting people to nature and landscape, as well as working in arboriculture in the urban environment. So without further ado, let's get straight into it.
So welcome to Catherine Nuttgens from the Woodland Trust. Catherine, it's so nice to see you.
Hello, Sharon.
Catherine, tell us a bit about your career to date, because you used to work in Sheffield, didn't you? And
I did. Well, even before then, many years ago, I first started out working for the Royal Forestry Society in Leeds, and I'd just gone straight out of volunteering with BTCV, but helped to set up a very fledgling sort of education project around basically helping people into woods owned by the landed gentry. So
yeah.
It's really interesting though. It was such a great start in sort of understanding forestry, and big thanks to Glenn Gorner, who I still see now. He was sort of my first introduction to kind of trees and woodlands, but then sort of via going through forest school training. I used to live in forest schools working for a charity called Groundwork, and then in Sheffield, lots of really interesting heritage projects, a lot about the landscape heritage of Sheffield, all to do with the kind of the wood and also the metallurgy, the archaeometallurgy that we're looking at, the steel and iron and stuff. And then I trained to become a tree officer with Andy Summerley, actually. I think you.
Andy Summerley. We always like to big up Andy Summerley of Tree Life, such a magnificent training organisation in the UK. Andy already knows this, but I want to say publicly again, Andy, you changed my life for the better. You gave me the confidence that I really needed, that I thought the first time in my life I was actually good at something. So Andy Summerley, Tree Life UK, excellent training organisation.
Well, he's ushered in many of us, and he was very helpful for me. I drew him a lot of pictures, as I'm sure he'll remember. I like drawing pictures of different aspects of trees, Codit and ancient trees, and all sorts of different bits and pieces. So that was my first introduction to kind of proper arboriculture, and then kind of, it was an exciting time in Sheffield while the tree wars were going on.
Yes,
that was actually while we were studying for arboriculture. And actually it is a really interesting, being someone who'd worked with communities an awful lot, it does make me feel quite proud of my, Sheffield as a city that people did stand up and battled, even though, I was obviously part of the council overall. It was good to see that love for trees and it was resolved in the way it did. So
actually, could we explore that a bit more, please, Catherine? Because our international listeners, because we found out the other day that we reach 51 countries.
Oh, amazing.
And Sheffield has become internationally known for the bad things that happened with the council and a tree contract. But there is good news. In fact, I spoke to you before for a podcast, Sheffield, and now the good news. But tell us about those times in a nutshell for listeners, please. What happened and what was the reaction and how was it resolved?
Well, I mean, what happened, the original, what happened in around 2012 is that the contract for the highways went over to a private contractor, and basically the contract was over 25 years, and it was signed that Amy, who was the contractor, would manage everything to do with the highways, which included the trees, over a 25-year period. And what I didn't have, arguably there should have been more arboricultural expertise right at the very beginning to kind of speak up for the trees. But certainly from a highways point of view, they do get a lot of complaints about street trees. You could see them as obstacles to a lovely flat pavement. And for whatever reason, their decision was made to take out a large proportion, I think somewhere in the region of possibly half our 36,000 street trees.
Wow.
So, Sheffield, just to put that into context, Sheffield is an extremely wooded city. We've got 4.5 million trees. when I first joined in 2008, honestly, it was amazing. It had 40 rangers, and it had the community forestry team who literally were just existed to plant trees with communities. They had a huge
Wow.
trees and woodlands team, huge friends groups, real, almost like exactly how it should be done with that engagement. And what was really sad to see is the kind of, with austerity, and obviously councils need to keep, they need to keep people alive, basically. So those kind of nice to have things started to fall off. And that came at the same time as the tree wars. And I think, studying arboriculture at the time was really interesting. There were a lot of people who I knew through community work that were involved in kind of protesting and, making quite a big thing of that the tree shouldn't be cut down. And I mean, it's well documented. If anyone's really interested, go and have a look at it. A film has been made, the felling, around kind of all the actions of the protesters. But it was a real challenge, because I think one thing that was never heard was the voice of people that actually work in arboriculture within the city. I mean, I've spoken to colleagues and they've said, "Oh, don't bring it up." We've had enough of it. But like, I always feel that, it would have been nice to hear the voices of the experts, because it always seems to be like the voices of the kind of those that were in charge at the council at the time, and then the protesters. But the kind of expertise sometimes gets lost in the
So frustrating. I mean,
Mm.
this really made international headlines, and people were arrested, and
Mm.
there was a lot of police involvement, a lot of anger, and some rather beautiful sort of demonstrations with people celebrating their street trees with art
Mm.
and music. And it has been resolved. I mean, where did it get to in terms of tree removals and now
They
tree planting?
I think they managed to remove around 6,000 trees before the protest was stopped. And I have to say that at the time, one of the key factors that stopped it was actually the police were no longer willing to be involved in it. And I really felt that it ramped up to such an extent there that it was starting to endanger people's lives, just
Yes.
the ramping up, the more extreme measures that people were taking. Fortunately, I mean, there's kind of been a movement towards resolving the kind of issues. Obviously, those that protested are still really angry. They were arrested. It cost them money. There's time as reputation. Obviously, some of them, would have been sort of possibly ended up with a criminal record. And the anger and to be quite honest, some of the ways that people within the council at the time treated those people was quite shocking, as can be seen in the Lawton reports. But now there's kind of a new leader of the council, there's a new head of new chief exec at the council, and they've really gone quite a long way to apologise profusely about the whole thing and try and move forward. And I think now that, I mean, when you look at a wider context, I really feel that we've got a climate crisis on our hands. Like,
Haven't we?
we've got to look at this together. So, it's councils have got it tough. It's been difficult over austerity. It's not getting any better. But I think really it would be great if everyone can pull together and support their councils in looking after the trees and caring for the trees. It's not always easy. Certainly, what happened in Sheffield should never happen again. It was appalling. But I think, moving together in a positive way, because trees are such positive things. They bring so much joy and pleasure. They are incredible living things to have in our towns and cities.
They're essential, aren't they, Catherine? And I heard on the
Absolutely.
news today, which is the 9th of January 2024, that it has been released that last year was the hottest year on record.
Mm.
It's the implications of rising temperatures, and we know trees are part of the solution. We know trees are part of the solution socially as well as environmentally, and people are really, really taking note of this. I mean, certainly the public have become increasingly mobilised. I think
Mm.
Sheffield has been almost a blueprint for other protests around the country. Plymouth, for example, not commenting on the merits or otherwise of any case here, but it has actually made tree protesting something that's more in a public domain
Mm.
for the average person rather than somebody on a
I think
particular
that,
pastime.
yeah, I mean, that was interesting after Sheffield, but there was an ARB conference sort of around about that time, and one of the tree officers was saying, well, thank you very much, Sheffield, because now we've got something to hold over the councillors to say, oh, you
Yes.
don't want another Sheffield, you know,
Yeah.
and like almost that playbook, it's not been good for Sheffield, but I think it's been good for other cities, not just in the UK, but actually around the world. I was
Yes.
reading what is it, is it Overstory?
Oh, yes.
And that was really interesting because that had a similar, at the beginning of it, had a similar, like somebody comes along in the night and fells all the trees, you know,
Yeah.
the evil council or whatever. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So kind of that interest in trees. But then, you know, even things like the sycamore gap tree, which was essentially a sycamore, you know, it was one sycamore, but absolutely stunningly beautiful, you know. And that the removal of that and the outpouring of grief that people felt
Yes.
about that, I think it just goes to show how connected people are with, you know, with trees. And hopefully we're starting to get, you know, one would hope perhaps that people look outside the window and don't look at a tree and think, well, that drops leaves, you know, it makes my car sticky. They actually are able to look at it in a much more positive way, you know, that we start to get a bit like wearing seatbelts, that people, you know, not just the tree huggers, but everybody starts to see trees in a much more positive light. And, you know, let's hope, you know, that kind of, you know, the shift is happening.
I think the shift is definitely happening. I mean, there was a real collective outpouring of grief and a national conversation about the sycamore gap tree in all the media, and it's all to the good for those of us who do our job day in, day out, quite frankly, defending trees a lot of the time. So we are in exciting times, and we really need to be because we are desperate, aren't we? But how interesting to have had that experience in your career of doing good with trees in Sheffield at such a heightened emotional time. It must have brought you a lot of personal resilience.
Well, that was kind of the interesting thing, because I mean, before I came to the Woodland Trust, I was the community forestry manager. So my role was to plant trees with my team in sort of park, everywhere that wasn't a street tree basically was sort of where, you know, where we put the trees. And you know, sometimes it was quite hard because my team had some recruited from, you know, they were very, if they were kind of from the protester group, they were certainly, you know, on the edge of that, very supportive of trees. These were my staff, but they used to get quite a lot of negativity from the public. That kind of like, oh, Sheffield Council just here to cut down the trees. And it's like, it's a shame. It's like, let's move forward. And you know, and actually that while we were delivering sort of tree planting over COVID, you know, I can't express what a positive thing is to get school children out. You know how difficult it was over COVID with, you know, kids kind of being stuck in classrooms, are very isolated, and, you know, teachers absolutely pulling their hair out to get the classes out with their teachers, out on a sunny January day, you know, in a bit in the mud, you know, with lots of trees, talking about trees, but all sorts of other things, learning about what's under the ground. You know, we found
Yes.
bits of coal and pottery, and that started discussions about their local area and what might have been there. And, you know, the value of that, it's more than just it's so much more than just tree
Yes.
planting. It's just the enjoyment of being out in nature and exploring, and, you know, not having a fixed agenda of what you're going to learn, but learning so much by that experiential, actually picking things up, digging the ground, putting trees in.
Absolutely.
So many discussions. It was so amazing to do all of that. It was a real joy after, you know, COVID lockdowns and things.
Oh, anything where you're doing a task outdoors together with others, doing something physical, getting dirty, doing something new, using a tool for the first time, or maybe not very often, making new friendships, having a bit of a giggle. I mean, it's brilliant for our minds and our bodies and our gut biome, which I'm always banging on about. And no, it's great. I mean, I've carried out quite a bit of that myself, not on the same scale as you, but oh, utterly joyful. And anybody listening to this podcast, if you've got the chance to do some planting with children through the school or another organisation, just go for it. Because boy, will it lift the January blues. It really will.
It really does.
So now you're with the Woodland Trust. Tell us about your current role.
Yeah, so I'm the urban programme lead, and kind of sort of been overseeing quite a number of different projects. There's kind of various ones. We've got a little project with the Arb Association around water your trees, but there's kind of greening Grantham, where we're looking to see whether we can get some more trees in Grantham, because actually not many trees in the city centre, in the town centre of Grantham, even though it is the home of the Woodland Trust. Yeah, there's the Urban Forest Accelerator with the National Trust in Birmingham, which is quite a big project. But what's been our kind of major push, which has, I think, taken over my entire life for at least 9 months, has been the Tree Equity Project. And this is a project with American Forests and the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, basically about using I'll tell you about it a bit. American Forests, about 2 or 3 years ago, started to map the kind of more deprived areas and then put where the canopy cover layer on top of that. And what they found was that in the US, there is a real line between the treed areas that tend to be kind of predominantly affluent white areas, and then much less treed areas that tend to be the more areas where people of colour were. And they actually mapped the whole of the US, all the urban areas in the US, to kind of help illustrate these disparities. Now, what was really great for them is that Joe Biden got into power, and he was looking somewhere to spend his Inflation Reduction Act money, and they actually got $1.5 billion to help boost tree equity in those areas. Now, what I love about the American Forest Project is that it's not just about planting trees, it's about looking after the trees we've already got. It's about recruiting people that are local to those areas, and getting them to be tree advocates, to be I think they call them tree captains. So it's people from those communities that are helping make the case for trees in those communities. And yeah, I mean, and obviously there's tree planting and all that kind of thing, and training around sort of more arboricultural factors. And I think, it's great. Go and look at the website. It's really, really good, the things that they've done in the US, and it continues to go. So they've had such success in the US that they decided to come to us in the UK. I think my colleague Adam Cormack had a meeting with Chris David from American Forests, and Chris said that he'd really like to come over here and do something similar for the UK. And here we are. So we began the projects last year.
So how does it work? So first of all, how do they gather the data? How do they gather the canopy data, and how do they gather the data of deprived areas?
Well, that's quite interesting, because the US, I think it took them a long time to gather that information in the US. In the UK, I think because we're a smaller country, we are in fact one of the most mapped countries in the world. And there's been something called the Indices of Multiple Deprivation around for a very long time. I've done a lot of funding bids, and I can tell you they're absolutely super useful when you're looking at areas that need investment. So basically, using what we call LSOAs in England, and they're called various, so they're called lower super output areas. These are tiny little census blocks on the map, and over COVID, if you were looking about whether your neighbourhood had more cases than other neighbourhoods, that's the blocks that we're using. I don't know whether anyone looked at that. I did a lot, but so these little blocks, and each one has is kind of measured to how deprived it is. So there's things like income, education, employment, health. You have when we're thinking about deprivation, we have the priority index, and this is what these 6 factors do, is that they're the things that make those areas a priority. Like, where do we need the trees? And that's based on, from the indices of deprivation, We've got income, unemployment and health, so the areas that are worse for that. We've also got age. So these are areas where people either are particularly older or particularly old, or they have very young children. And those areas are going to be where people it's not easy for them to move around. So they're kind of stuck there. If you're particularly aged, or if you've got young children, it's not something, if something is bad, it's harder to move away from it. The other two indices that we've used are environmental ones, and one of which is air quality. So kind of nitrogen dioxide and 2.5 PM, there's smaller particulate matter, and then heat disparity. So that's kind of areas that are going to be particularly hot when the sun is shining. We managed to get data from Landsat to show the areas that are reflecting back the most heat, which obviously, if you've got a very hot area that's hotter, then trees are going to help that. We've then, on top of that, we lay the canopy cover data. Now, we were lucky enough to get canopy cover data from Google, which means that it's comparable across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And that's actually a bit of a coup, because it means that, there's lots of different ways of measuring canopy cover data, but Google should be, kind of basically it's comparable from one bit to the other.
Yes.
Can
I ask you about that? Because how do you go about getting it from other than, I can go onto Google Maps now and look at Google Earth and I can see the trees on there, but what process did you go through to get the canopy from Google?
It was something that American Forests were working on, because they had, that's what they'd done previously for the work in the US. I think they have an actual relationship with Google, so they have someone from Google that they're talking about. But I know that Google are starting to move much more into this area, and I think there's something called the Google Environmental Services or something like that. You can Google it.
Yeah.
But if you Google, say, Google tree canopy, you can start to see that Google are building up that data for those areas. I don't think at the moment that you're actually able to get hold of the hard data from that. I don't know whether they're releasing that, but it's like almost on a week by week basis that things are being developed. And with my old Sheffield hat on, having something where you're able to compare one, canopy cover year on year, that in itself would be amazing, because then you can start to see where what are the causes of change. I don't actually know what the causes of change of canopy cover are, or whether it's getting more or less,
because it's going to be really complex, but with that sort of data, it's going to be fascinating. Is it increasing urbanization? Is it disease? Is it highway infrastructure? Has there been a lot of more planting on farmland, within urban areas? Just to look at all of those subtle differences, it's going to help our understanding and help urban forestry as an even better baseline. Well, I know that we do have a patchwork of excellent iTree data in the UK, but it's not universal because it has to be commissioned. And there are other canopy cover measures, but this sounds really interesting to me.
If what's useful about Google is that it's not going to be super detailed, and there's many different ways of managing data, or things like iTree Eco that helps look at your urban forest in depth. Blue Sky helps measure the heights and the volumes of canopy cover and stuff. Google doesn't do that. Google has that overarching view that probably is going to give you that space over time, and it is. And as to my knowledge, certainly from the tree equity score, it's free. That's a massive factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's for poor cash-strapped local authorities. It is something that would be useful. So that's what we have used for the tree equity score, and what that does is give each individual LSOA a score where 100 is like the highest, and the lowest, I think that's the lowest, around 45. So it kind of, what it does, it prioritizes those areas, and using colours where orange is kind of the lowest score and green is the highest, it gives you a really good visual indication of where the priority is for tree canopy, for tree canopy cover in those those areas.
And so where can people find this map?
So it is on you can just Google Tree Equity Score UK. And I mean, the best way, it's always harder because I was thinking, I could show it on the screen, but actually if it's a podcast, I'm not going to be able to see that. I would absolutely say the best way of learning about how to use it and how it works is to go to the website, Tree Equity Score UK, and have a play. What American Forests have done, some really useful tools in here, because it's not just a map of different colours, different scores. There you can actually print out reports that use some of the iTree eco data to give some indicative environmental values of if you wanted to increase your tree equity score, then you would, it would absorb this amount of carbon, it would offset, it would help absorb certain amounts of pollution and offset, mitigate so much flooding. But also the other thing is it's got lots of sliding scales. So if you say wanted to look at, you wanted to look at what are the highest, the priority areas for tree planting in your city, you can use the tree equity score slider so that it only highlights those that are under sort of 50, under the score of 50, and only those will show up. Or another way, we've put in things like ethnicity. So if you say, well, I want a project where it's going to prioritize those areas of highest ethnicity, then you can use that as a sliding scale so that only highlights those areas. And actually what would be so useful for the trust is to have people who love data to go and have a look at it, take the data away, do some analysis of it. It would be really interesting because we've only had it for, a month, and we've had Christmas in between. So getting people to use that data, and it's all downloadable on the website, you can get the data, and just making it, let's find out what this is showing us here, because we haven't had the time to look at it. So the further we can get it to spread, the more people that can use it, then, so much the better.
Hopefully it's going to inspire tree planting in the right places with the most need.
I think, yes, that's what we're hoping. I think not just that, it's kind of, that we've kind of, we've thought about the what next. If we're thinking about councillors, what we don't want to do is say, oh, right, I'm going to plant 1 million trees. It's like that. No, don't want that. We need that proper quality investment into places. So whether it's like getting a good system like, I don't know, something like Tree Plotter or Easy Tree or one of those data, helping people know what they've got a little bit better so they're able to make better judgments, whether it's integrating tree equity into part of strategies. That's something that's quite important, something that Belfast have done. Birmingham got there before us. They're well ahead of the game. So but using that and saying, well, we're going to prioritise tree planting in those areas where people have the least. Because often, one of the things that I hope it will do is that often those that shout the loudest are the ones that have the most agency and possibly the most affluent. So they're the ones that get the trees, where it's always, the communities that actually are struggling with things like the cost of living crisis that don't get those nice things, and just to try and get a bit more equitable to actually, we want to work here. So if you're going to fund a place, rather than fund this affluent area, let's put it
absolutely
in the less affluent area.
This episode of Tree Lady Talks is sponsored by Atlas Arboriculture. I have Steve with me. Steve, tell us about the piece of kit you have.
So we have a Vox geo-injector. It's a tool that helps to decompact and aerate soil. It's particularly useful for treating compacted root zones and beneficial for overall tree health. And hopefully we'll be able to show quite a few delegates at the conference what it's all about.
More of which at the end of this podcast. But Steve, where can people find you?
So people can find me on www.atlas-arboriculture.com. And if they'd like to contact us by email, all of the details will be on the website.
Thank you very much. It's not just about tree planting, is it? It's about valuing what we have.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think also it could be a vehicle for local authorities and decision makers within a deprived area to think, well, actually, potentially these trees that we already have are more valuable than
Absolutely.
those in an affluent area, perhaps due to scarcity.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's the thing. Things like good protection, good tree protection. I mean, you know, having worked in planning, you know, the trees that are very well protected, trees in conservation areas and, you know, TPOs and affluent areas, actually those that perhaps were a new housing estate in, that have had the TPOs on them, it's not affluent, get nibbled away at all the time. And, you know, and the
Yeah,
trees disappear, think, where's that tree gone? And then the neighbours
yeah,
say, oh, well, so-and-so had it down, but they've moved out now. And there's nothing you can do about it,
yeah,
you know, but actually highlighting the value of these trees, you know, if the it's very difficult, don't get me wrong, like I fully understand the difficulties faced by local authorities at the moment, but just shining a light on those trees in more deprived areas, and helping them thrive. Because one thing is, if you can end up with healthier trees, you know, if things can be picked up earlier, and you know, things like disease or even just things like mulching, you know,
yeah,
if you can expand that canopy cover and have healthier trees, then you know, then it's better than planting loads of trees that, you know,
yeah,
then, you
absolutely.
know, so that health of trees. And the other thing is people, like that's the investment in people in tree equity. So as I said, people's in less affluent areas, they don't necessarily have the agency or the time to kind of form a friends group, whatever. They need someone to kind of facilitate that for them, you know, to set up the meetings, to organize the events. And you know, but if you can start to get the ball rolling, you know, then stuff starts happening and people see areas much more positive. And you know, if local people are looking after the trees, or are trained up or are employed to look after those trees, you're going to get a larger canopy areas. The trees are better looked after, more trees are planted, you know, people appreciate trees aren't vandalized, you know, there's less
Yes,
antisocial behavior. So, you know, so I cannot express the importance of investing in not just trees but in people as well in these areas.
absolutely. No, that's incredibly important. And we also know when you start investing in trees and the canopy cover increases and the quality of that tree canopy improves, then there are numerous studies which show property prices go up, rental price, well, we don't want rental prices to go up, but the area generally feels better, shops do better, it's a pleasant area to work, shop, play, and it becomes an area for community building as well. You're more likely to spend time in a beautiful treed park than one that is barren with some broken play equipment. And it just, the whole thing is a spiral upwards. We've seen this countless times. So I think this talk is going to be really good for allocating resources for people and for trees.
I hope so. And yeah, and just highlighting, just being that illustrative, you know, tool for anyone to have a go at, you know, go and find out what the tree equity is in your local area. And you
Yeah.
know, and I think people in those communities, like they know what works for them. So like it would be great if we get 1.5 billion from the next government. Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
amazing? But even if we don't, the fact that it's there and it's used, it kind of puts another kind of, it starts a conversation about climate justice. You know, there's all the benefits of trees, you know, there's things like shading and flood mitigation and all that kind of thing. The tree is a kind of fairly cheap kind of Swiss Army knife of
Yeah.
climate and well-being solution. So like just kind of highlighting that that's not just for the super expensive, you know, city centre development, but actually needs to be considered, like carefully considered for more deprived areas, you know, that it's actually not that expensive to do, they're quite good. And just as a former tree officer, I mean, I'm sure so many people on your podcast say this, but getting it in the right place and the right tree.
Yes.
Because
Oh my goodness.
one other thing that does happen is that I think people who are the areas of higher poverty have less facility to deal with some of the problems that trees cause. And I think, you know, careful planning around the way that the treescape is developed so that that doesn't cause so many problems, I think is like absolutely crucial as well, because that's where you lose your fans of trees is if, you know, if a tree's been planted too close and like someone's garden is like not just a bit in shade but like totally overlooked by a tree. You know, it is, I speak for myself here, not the Woodland Trust, but like you know, sometimes I have some sympathy with areas where trees have become problematic. So getting it right for people so that it doesn't need loads of cutting back, or, you know, or being told that they're not going to cut it back and they can pay themselves to cut it back. It seems unfair to ask, you know, an old age pensioner in a council house that, you know, that's what they should do. So yeah, it's it'd be lovely to see that change. But I would say that's entirely personal. Making trees work for people, I think, is really important.
Good. Have you had any early feedback from decision makers about the tree equity or from tree professionals?
Well, we've literally just launched it just before Christmas, and we have had quite a few emails and questions. I think some people have picked it up on LinkedIn, but we've got a big another big launch next week where we're doing a webinar for all the kind of policymakers, and hopefully there should be some you know, some interest in that. But I mean, as I say, we've been working closely with Belfast Tree Team, with Alan McAfee there, and they've integrated it as part of their tree strategy. We're certainly having conversations with quite a few other councils around. I mean, Birmingham, Christchurch and Poole, I think, you know, they've been interested. Plymouth, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, BCP, I remember that one. Yeah, there's just been a few. I mean, I'd say we're just back after Christmas, so things are coming in and we're just like kind of catching it as it falls. So yeah, but I think this is going to be something that, you know, within the next year, it starts to be a word that people use. When we started this project, like the words tree equity are like, what is that? No one knows what it is. Hopefully by this time next year, that the tree equity will be a known concept in the UK. It's certainly what American forests want, and you know, and I think it's a really useful kind of way of thinking about the distribution of trees across towns and cities in the UK. So
It's great. Go and check it out, everybody. And it's another very different thing that the Woodland Trust do. They do so many wonderful things. Many people think of them for planting new woodlands and protecting what we have, but there is a whole urban forestry section. So go and check it out on the website. But Catherine, you've had a career just being passionate about people and trees. And I wonder what's next for you personally.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Sharon, because yeah, I've been doing so many different things through my career. So I think now it's a kind of start of a new year, and I think I'm going to try it out on my own. So I'm just after the end of January, I'm going to become an independent urban forester. What that will look like, I mean, my background is quite a lot in communication, in education, it's in arboriculture, and you know, and then kind of standard arboricultural practices and things. But I don't know, like I'm going to take some time to go and talk to people, and you know, have a look at the kind of arboricultural landscape and the wider landscape, kind of see what's out there and see whether there's a way of getting all that enthusiasm, you know, the joy that I feel with working with trees and with urban nature, and seeing whether there's a way I can kind of amalgamate that into something that, you know, into a business. And I don't know whether I can. I don't know, but
I think you will. And how can people find you from the 1st of February?
Well, probably the easiest place to do is on LinkedIn, because that tends to be my social media of choice. But I also have an email, which is Catherine@Nuttgens.uk. So that's Catherine with a C, and Nuttgens is spelled Nuttgens, and then .uk. So yes, if anyone's interested, if you may know me, you may not, but you know, I will have some free time after January the 31st, and yeah, so it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to, you know, just exploring out there and, you know, seeing what I can do.
Excellent. And finally, Catherine, what's your dream scenario?
That's such a hard question. You know what? It's interesting. I don't think there's any kind of end points. But I think for me, it's really important. I've always enjoyed the work that I've done. You know, I've always enjoyed like making a plan with other people and making it come together. And it's usually around something quite, you know, that is about creating something joyful or something beautiful or whatever it is. And I think if I could find a way of integrating that into like also good arboriculture, then that would be my perfect way of doing stuff. And yeah, so it's thinking around kind of how I get there with that and it's really hard. It's quite a hard question to answer.
That's okay. Everybody finds it hard. It's rather naughty of me, actually.
Yeah. So yeah, but we'll see. I mean, it would be nice to set up some sort of charity or organisation that kind of promotes people and trees and urban nature. But I'd say there's many things to think about before kind of get there. It would be, I mean, it would be nice to do something around that. I think it's something that's kind of needed. It feels like environmental education has kind of got to the back burner, like from campaigns. I think there's a lot of activism, but sometimes that's not always positive activism. It's almost a social media thing, is you like have this is the thing that we're against, and you think actually we all need to be for things. Yeah, that's what I want to find the.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, there's too much negativity when we should be concentrating on what we can do.
Absolutely.
Well, Catherine Nuttgens, it's been brilliant talking to you about tree equity and other things, and I wish you every success. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. It's lovely to talk to you.
And just before we go, time to tell you about our very exciting new conference in February 2024.
Trees, planning and construction. Is it really working? Do you feel isolated? Well, this conference plans to change that. We're here at BS 5837 Speed Briefing. Biodiversity net gain, what does it mean for trees? And trees and planning law, are you up to date? Sarah Dodd will tell us. Hear from keynote speaker Keith Saker and Jeremy Barrell. We'll hear the views of London Tree Officer John Ryan on what works well and ideas for the future, and a panel of experts, a planning consultant, highway engineer, demolition contractor and building contractor, and I will be saying what works for me. All this and outdoor demonstrations on the 20th of February 2024 here at Braxted Park. And thanks to our headline sponsors, Barcham Trees, we're offering cut price tickets for tree officers. See us at Sharon Hosegood Associates /training or Eventbrite Trees, Planning and Construction.